We're going to start in about 30 seconds, so if you could take your seats, please. Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Portland, Oregon's premier citizens forum. We're delighted you're with us today. I'm Don Williams, president of City Club. Our topic today is Portland's Creative Grid, networking Portland's creative institutions. Our speakers are Dr. Tom Manley, president of Pacific Northwest College of Art, Brad Cloepfil, founder of Allied Work Architectures, and Sohrab Vossoughi, founder and chief creative officer of Ziba Design. For the benefit of our radio and television audiences, please turn off your cell phones and other electronic devices. First, a few announcements. Next Friday, there will be no Friday Forum because of the Memorial Day holiday. Drive safely. I want to remind you that we've recently begun our spring fundraising appeal here at City Club, and we'd like your support. Now, you may ask, why should I give the City Club? Well, first, our Friday Forums, 43 this past year, have brought informative programs to the community. You all know about our citizen-driven research program. And finally, our innovative small group programs are engaging more and younger members in our community's civic life. By making a donation to City Club, you'll help us start out our new fiscal year with the resources we need to continue this excellent programming and research. Donation envelopes are in the back of the room, and we encourage that. City Club's popular Citizen Salon dinner and discussion series is back again this summer. The salons were named in their debut year 4 years ago as the best intellectual salon by Portland Monthly magazine. They provide an intimate opportunity for not only great dining, but great dialogue with newsmakers while raising funds for City Club. In the bulletin, the City Club bulletin, you'll see a list of 12 salons that will be happening this summer, and the topics range from public parks to political spin, urban planning to the arts, and we have an amazing lineup of provocateurs. Please make a reservation by calling the City Club office, and you better hurry. They sold out last year. And finally, we're nearing the end of our annual spring membership drive. Our goal this year has been to welcome 100 new members, and we're almost there. We're at 70, and we have 2 weeks left. If you aren't a member and would like to join, talk to the City Club staff in the back of the room. And speaking of new members, we have a bunch of them today. I'm going to ask them to stand when I introduce them. Hold your applause until all are introduced, please. Jan Stransky, who's a broker at Windermere. Jeff Chedez, CPA for Stephanie Chedez, LLP. William Becker. Tricia Snell, who's the Executive Director at Caldera Arts. Sarah Duger, Program and Development at Pear. Brian Fielder, who's a Product Manager at Clinician. Barbara Rice, who's a writer with AHA. And Walter Keutel, who's a German translator. We welcome you to City Club. Thank you for joining. We wouldn't be able to have these wonderful City Club programs without the support of and generosity of our corporate sponsors, and I'd like you to join me in thanking our sponsors this quarter: Zimmer Gunsel Frasca Architects, LLP, Key Bank, and the law firm of Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt. Thank you. During the last 2 months, City Club has had just a wonderful series of political debates. You've seen candidates for local, national, and state offices spar, question their opponents, take strong positions, and in the U.S. senatorial debate, even argue over Bono's ultimate place in history. But the City Club mission is to educate the community transcends just political topics. And today we have a great topic, the creative grid. I have to admit, when I first saw the title Creative Grid, I first thought, is this another politician's plan to improve downtown traffic in Portland? But it's far more compelling than that. The social, cultural, and economic interaction and creative efforts in architecture, the theater, and literature demand serious discussion. We have three dynamic speakers today, and politicians can be unpredictable, but so can those with a creative bent. In fact, one pundit observed, the creative person is both more primitive, more cultivated, more destructive, a lot madder, and a lot saner than the average person. Well, today you get to be the judge. Dr. Thomas Manley has served as president of Pacific Northwest College of Art since 2003. Prior to his appointment at PNCA, he was senior vice president for college advancement at Pitzer College in California. As an educator and administrator, Tom has specialized in the development of international and intercultural study programs that are intellectually rigorous. He received his master's and his PhD from Claremont Graduate University, and his special areas of focus have been evaluation and planning, cultural education, and Japanese history. Dr. Manley has expanded the size of PNCA both academically and physically. He has created relationships with many of the city's top-tier business and cultural players, and his efforts have helped in getting them to lend their support to outline a new and forceful agenda for the college. Our second speaker is Brad Cloepfil. Brad founded Allied Work Architecture in 1994 and is now its principal and lead designer. He's a native of Portland and earned his bachelor's degree in architecture at the University of Oregon. He then embarked on a journey of more than a decade of work, teaching, and study in Switzerland, Los Angeles, New Orleans, and New York. He then completed an advanced degree from the Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, and he then worked as a designer and project engineer. He taught architecture at the U of O, and then founded Allied Works. Brad remains closely involved in the design and execution of every project at Allied Work. He also continues to lecture and teach. His first major project was an adaptive reuse of a Portland warehouse for Wieden+Kennedy, which I'm sure all of you are aware about. And some of his other high-profile works include the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis and the expansion of the Seattle Art Museum. Sohrab Vossoughi is founder and president of Ziba Design, the company he started in 1984. He is a recipient of more than 30 patents and over 200 design awards. Sohrab was born in Iran and moved to the United States in 1971. He studied mechanical engineering for 3 years and then switched to design, industrial design. He graduated from San Jose State and joined Hewlett-Packard Corporation, moving to Vancouver. After serving as an independent consultant to startup companies, he launched a product development firm he named Ziba Design. He continues to direct projects for clients including Nike, Microsoft, Xerox, Hewlett-Packard, and a host of other clients ranging from startup firms to Fortune 500 companies. Mr. Vossoughi was named Business Week's Entrepreneur of the Year in 1992. He was also elected one of the most 40 influential designers in the United States by International Design magazine. Please join me in welcoming our speakers, which will start with Dr. Tom Manley.
This is a leftover political speech. Thanks to City Club for hosting this discussion, and for Sohrab and Brad for joining me. Given that this is the high season for political ambitions, we were wondering whether our being invited was something of comic relief, or maybe even wild desperation. Either way, we're happy to be with you. And we would also like to dedicate this discussion to the great Robert Rauschenberg, who did so much to get us to see the world differently through his amazing creative life. He passed away earlier this week. My role this afternoon is briefly to introduce the idea of creative grid, and then, when I've failed to make this clear, to turn to Brad and Sohrab and have them come to my rescue and hopefully make it brilliantly clear. What is the creative grid? I have always loved Walt Whitman's words of personal exploration, that we each make our maps as we move through our lives. Maybe that's why so many of us like to diagram and draw ideas as part of an envisioning or problem-solving process. In any case, that is where the notion of the creative grid started for me, as a flexible and extendable overlay concept aimed at showing new combinations of creative activity. When at Pitzer College, the grid grew as a set of global programs that immersed students in rich, small C cultural experiences, and then encouraged them to bring those lessons home to reconsider their own communities and their own cultures. Among other things, this led to developing a traditional Chinese medicine program for American pre-med students in Beijing. It led to starting a full semester Spanish immersion program in a Latino neighborhood in Los Angeles, 15 miles away from the Claremont College's campuses. These were real innovations at that time. They extended the quality of a good liberal arts education through reciprocally meaningful collaborations. When I came to PNCA in 2003, it was with the conviction that the school could grow from a local regional college to a globally connected one if it focused on authentic quality, the authentic quality of its programs, and the power to innovate and collaborate. Quality, innovation, and collaboration. These are important hallmarks of a creative practice and process. I'll come back to quality in a moment. Innovation. Innovation is an indispensable artist's tool. It works with imagination, which envisions what does not yet exist but might, and provides a bridge to span the gap between the two. One of the innovations of PNCA in the new Ford Institute for Visual Education program, or FIVE, is an artist-in-residence program that will attract top-flight artists, designers, and other creative doers to engage students, faculty, and creative community here at a high level, while connecting our community to theirs, whether in Tokyo, Cape Town, Rio, or Istanbul. The multiplier impact of this program over time is tremendous. In just 10 years, it might bring 50 artists and their networks to be based in Portland, and through those involvements create pathways to other places and projects for many thousands across the city, state, and region. This will inspire new enterprises, create jobs, and lead to further innovation. I might point out that it was the core idea of this artist-in-residence program as an innovation that most excited Mrs. Ford and her family and ultimately led to last year's $15 million gift. Collaboration. According to another poet, William Blake, collaboration characterizes the highest level of creative human endeavor, a level of activity which Blake tells us we will find in the true city of art. Through collaboration, what we could not accomplish on our own, we accomplish through allied effort. And through collaboration, we bring into play new creative territory. To help think about how to locate and travel to that territory, we need a conceptual map to show relationships among promising collaborations and identify possibilities. A creative grid is a conceptual map of this sort. It does not follow the pattern of existing streets or geography, but rather marks the many epicenters of creative energy, extending locally, regionally, and globally. PNCA and the Ford Institute for Visual Education is currently working to define its first set of these collaborations, and I won't be able to go into them in any detail here. But I can say that the Ford family, we created a map of possible programs that included partnerships with existing educational institutions like Portland State University and the University of Oregon and the Oregon College of Art and Craft, cultural organizations like the Portland Art Museum and the Museum of Contemporary Craft, nonprofit agencies like Mercy Corps, and other cultural assets like the Japanese Garden, and of course, our leading edge creative businesses. The PNCA 5 map defined more than 5 such potential collaborations and included sequential art, which is a combination of animation, moving images, and graphic novels, a project-based global program to engage real-world problems, curatorial studies, community art, and finally, industrial craft. Quality. As we think about how to build institutions, communities, and lives that are rich with civic care and imagination, we may do well to locate the creative powerhouses that give much of the energy to the grid, to find ways to deepen quality elsewhere through collaborations that build on and leverage the strengths of these powerhouses. John Jay, the Executive Creative Director of Wieden+Kennedy, who's here with us today, has observed that there are no longer any barriers to the best in Portland. Wieden+Kennedy is certainly an example of that, and so is Ziba and Allied Works and Nike and other enterprises, big and small. I wonder if you've heard of Sasha White's Vanilla Bikes. These are all world-class in what they do. We couldn't want for better models of authentic quality, and if we are intent on further advancing our depth and reach as a creative class city, I would suggest that it's not something that we can do by traveling by any map that we buy or borrow. Investing in quality, innovation, and collaboration true to the place is the best way to make and follow our creative map. Among the many writers who now extol the virtues of creative economy and leadership, Daniel Pink's book, A Whole New Mind, declares the dawn of the conceptual age is the successor to the information age. My colleague Roger Mandel, the soon-to-retire president of the Rhode Island School of Design, has taken that a step further by proposing that we are on the verge of an age of consilience. Consilience is a process through which knowledge in one area, let's say science, jumps together with knowledge from a different area, let's say art, and results in breakthrough understandings. Can innovation and collaboration promote consilience? Is the creative grid a useful concept for locating these potentials? Sohrab, Brad?
I don't know if I can directly answer that question, but I was thinking about the accomplishments and the aspirations of PNCA, and particularly in the context of Portland, and what I think is so exciting about it as a model, I think, for any institution in the city or state, and any institution in a smaller metropolitan area, is that whereas it's a very bold vision and a very aggressive vision that Tom is pursuing, it springs from something so humble. It springs, I think, your notion of authentic quality, it springs of something that is from sort of deeply understanding who you are as an institution or an organization, and understanding your limitations as much as anything else, and then reaching out and just inviting other people and other voices in to participate. And I think the humility of it, which then produces such an incredible opportunity of understanding your limitations, but then seeking the things and the collaborations and the opportunities. I mean, one of the things PNCA is doing right now that's so exciting in this 5 program and many of the other programs that I can't even keep up with anymore, there's so many new programs, is inviting voices to Oregon that we wouldn't be able to hear. And just the impetus and inspiration of that kind of energy influx. Again, you know, rather than aspiring to do everything well or even everything okay, to say, well, let's do a few things extremely well and then find the people and the programs and the opportunities that are really excellent and invite them to Portland. And we were all talking about this earlier. It is such an amazing time in the history of this city, certainly like no other time in my adult life here, where you can invite anybody here and they'll come. I mean, people are so excited to come and be a part of this city. And they don't exactly know why even, which I think is really wonderful. But they'll come. It's a moment in time, I think, where anything we dream of or aspire to or ask, it will happen. And I think the reason I'm involved with Tom and PNCA is that institution at this moment in our history is such an exciting model for that kind of humility and aspiration.
Well, this whole issue of creative economies, and we all know that's the next economic paradigm, and we have all heard Richard Florida talking about the whole creative economy, and Portland being one of the epicenters of this creative culture and economy, and its ascent to become one of the centers. So, and one of the result of this is the creative grid, or the creative grid is one of the causes of this. I think it's a symbiotic relationship, and whichever it is, it's that it is real and it's happening. But again, why Portland is in such a good place, or why is it happening to Portland? I really believe it's the DNA of the Portland, the place that makes it happen. And the DNA of Portland, I always talk about this. One of them is authenticity, which Tom talked about it. And it's, you know, this is a very, I'm from, you know, I'm a transplant, although long time, 28 years, but still I have not only knowing the, you know, I used to live in California and before that in Iran, so I have some kind of frame of reference. And I tell you, not only it's authentic, it has this, the issue of collaboration is also very real here. It's one of the DNAs of this city. Authentic to me is something that we are not pretentious. There is no pretension here. You've seen a lot of places in United States of the world that they want to tell you what they really are not. And we are what we are. This is what we say, and that is a good, right connection. The other one, as I said, is that collaboration. And we've seen it in a lot of the issues with planning and everything with Portland, which is both a strength and weakness. We talked about that with Mayor Katz a little bit, what collaboration means to me, at least, which we can talk about later. And then humanism, as these are, it's a very human city, meaning you look at it from the way it's built, small blocks or whatever, you are not being overpowered by the city, but you are part of the city. And those are the stuff that actually brought me here, and I like to stay here. And the other one is this independent thinking. These are all the DNA of Portland, which is again in line with the DNA of a creative people or creative culture. That, you know, we do stuff differently and we don't care if somebody else does it. And if you have seen the things that sometimes we try to do to copy or to follow somebody, another city or whatever, it doesn't work here usually. You know, it just doesn't work. And the last one is the quality that Tom was talking about. I call it craft, the craft mentality here, because craft is about rigor, craft is about care, craft is about engagement, and these are all the qualities that I've seen. I mean, this forum here, you guys care and you are engaged with the city, and this is that craft mentality. And those are very, very positive, good or bad actually, because sometimes DNAs are, you know, it is what it is, but it is very similar to the creative culture. So it's well suited for the people with creative mind. And, you know, at Ziba, we kind of exercise this in a small microcosm, the diversity, the creative grid in a small microcosm. and so I can connect and relate with what Tom is talking about. But what is missing here, I would say, is diversity. That's huge. We need that diversity. And that's something that, again, at Ziba, we are doing it, and it's working absolutely well, because diversity creates open-mindedness. It creates tolerance, and we, to listen, to do things, learn from each other, and we really need to do that here. We need to, and then the next thing is also create density, which we are doing it, but density in this case means from the creative side. And how do you do that? Well, there's stuff that PDC is doing, and there's stuff that Tom is doing. The 5 is a great way. It just, you bring more and more of the creative people together. Some of the stuff that we, and when I say we, because I always talk about Mayor Katz's time was a wonderful time for the creative people. So we developed the design festival, the way we brought everybody together, and the collaboration of the different creative disciplines. It was just wonderful, and actually PNCA was part of that, and using the facility, collaborating with them. So this city has got it. It's got the DNA, and all we have to do is just basically make it, give it, nurture it, rather than trying to be something that we are not. So I agree with you.
They actually said they were going to throw rolls at me, so I'm relieved. One of the things that we had talked about was this idea of examples of how these collaborations could take place and how they're represented. And I wonder whether either of you could talk about examples of these sort of partnerships that result in breakthrough understandings or new spaces that you've seen in other places outside of Portland.
Well, you all remember the Xerox PARC experiment. Well, some of you might not, but the Xerox PARC I think was in the 70s. They experiment with putting artists and scientists together to collaborate, and some of the most advanced or unimaginable, we could say, from a technical point of view, but happened there. I mean, the whole idea of user interface on computers and the mouse for the computers, a lot of stuff that came from that. So that was the first example that I can talk about collaboration between different disciplines and innovating at a level that, it was an experiment and it worked. So collaboration really is one of the keys here, but for me, collaboration for the sake of collaboration is not the right thing. It doesn't work. And that was what happens in government usually. Smart collaboration is what I always talk about. It is working together, but for the cause of what is right, not because it's my idea or this idea or whatever. So collaboration to me is very, very, it's more than just a bunch of people coming together and singing together or whatever. So, and we exercise that at our firm again. And so Ziba is a great experimental laboratory for me, and I learn a lot from it, and I kind of try to see if when I'm working with the city and everything, to use some of that experience to help the creative culture grow and prosper here.
It's interesting because in my profession, architecture is by nature so collaborative. To build $60 million buildings takes hundreds of people and tremendous amount of expertise. But as I've worked more most of my work is in the area of the arts and art museums and collectors, and as I work more with museums and curators and then eventually with artists, again, I think it's part of that understanding that I've gained of really beginning to understand the limits of what architecture can do, and in realizing my own limits and the limited possibilities for buildings to communicate is when I started really reaching out to the individuals I was working with in the arts, and particularly starting to initiate collaborations with, I can just put my mouth around, particularly to start to initiate collaborations with artists. I was mentioning the other day we're doing a house in Dutchess County for a major contemporary art collector, and they commissioned an artist, Doug Aiken, who his piece he decided was to project video on all four sides, all four facades of the house, so basically obliterating the appearance of the house. So maybe that was his own criticism of what we were doing. But in actuality, it was so exciting for me because what he did was extend the voice of the house through another medium, through another set of eyes. So rather than taking offense, as I maybe should have, it was so exciting for me to see that my work inspired a conversation with another discipline and another form of media, and the two really merged into this incredible piece. And I think as we form teams and begin to work with other institutions, and then especially I think at the urban level, looking beyond the sort of normal set of voices, the normal sort of collaborations that I think we all have as creative makers, and bringing in those voices, because you never know, you absolutely never know what you're going to hear or find out, and just to amass that information, it is essentially just the quest for information. And I think all of us, and that certainly extends beyond creative firms and creative economy. That quest for information and new ideas is the genesis of our culture and is the genesis of our economy right now. And in places of limited means and limited access, like Portland, not being an international hub necessarily, it's just an absolute necessity for survival. So it's more than a collaboration. It's almost like a biological extension that the energy to do what we do has to come from multiple other sources outside of the city and outside of the region.
Do either of you think that's that out of that necessity we have an opportunity to do something that's distinctive and special?
Say it again, Tom.
In other words, one of the assumptions about this discussion today is that while there is rising levels of sort of creative practice and activity in the city, there is also now the concern about the economy, whether resources are going to be available to support a range of arts organizations, et cetera. If we were in Tokyo or New York, we would probably not be having those concerns to the same extent that we have them here. But to what extent does that, the absence of a flotilla of Fortune 500 companies actually represent a potential strength for us?
Well, one thing interesting about creative people is that they also are creative with the way they do things, and they make means, make the ends meet. And but I think it's really important to have some support system or add to the support system. When I talk about support system, it's not just, again, buildings. This is not what creative people are looking for. It's not brick and mortar. It is that it's inspiration. It is information. It is collaboration. Those are the things that they are looking for, and we need to. I think the idea of five, or that PNCA has, of bringing people from outside to collaborate with the students and people from outside to collaborate with them, that type of collaboration, that type of support system is very, very necessary. I mean, city is actually really looking into this also. I'm involved with them to some extent of developing more of a resource center, because there are some resources that they need that makes their life easier and makes them more effective in what they're doing. So, Portland not being so large and being small in scale, and then having all these different inspirational units or support systems around them, it's really working well. Again, it's part of who we are, and it works. If you were in LA, you might be, you could have a PNCA, I don't know, 50 miles away, 60 miles away. The connection just wouldn't be as much as it is right now, where we are all gathered together within, I don't know, 20 miles max. And then, of course, U of O, now that it's in town, it's just another support system. So it's really, it's working and it's happening.
I think this question of money and support for institution is a perfect one to pose to the city of Portland, because I think a lot of our cultural institutions were established on the model that exist in other cities with much more resources. And I think the country can only have so many museum of modern arts or LA County museums or Chicago symphonies. And I think it's long past time to re-examine those models and to realize that a city like Portland, if it's going to have vibrant cultural institutions, it has to invent new models. It just has to invent new models. Being a symphony orchestra in the model of the Chicago Symphony, but not the Chicago Symphony, isn't viable. Being a university in the model of a major Ivy League university isn't a viable model for the state of Oregon. And so to take that hard look at being honest about what you are and then reinvent yourself. I mean, it really, I think there is a bit of an institutional crisis in the state, in that those models haven't been questioned as rigorously as they can. And I think one of the opportunities that Tom has taken advantage of is his moment in time in coming into the school, in the evolution of the new space and the new program, and a lot of the work that Greg Ware and others had done, was to take that moment and completely re-envision the institution and what it is and what it can become. And so I don't think the money is a limitation, it's really an invitation. But you have to do it. You have to have the will to sort of ask those questions and say that perhaps the model we've been operating on for the last 15, 20, 80 years isn't what we need today in this town with the opportunities that we have.
Jay had talked to me a couple of years ago about the idea of creative mix and the importance of, and it was really, he was posing a question. It wasn't exactly a set of answers that he was bringing to the conversation, but it was, how do we imagine that this place is changing in the way that it is changing creatively, and where people are coming from, and do we really know what the dynamics of that creative mix are, and if we do begin to figure it out, how do we work with it in a way that it's productive, and that it allows the place to reinvent itself when it needs to, and to find new models. I don't know if either of you have thoughts on that.
What was the question? How do we find new models? Is that what that was?
Whether how the nature of the changing creative mix here, how we work with that in a way that allows us to do what you're talking about, which is to challenge existing models.
Sure.
And
I think it gets partly to what Sohrab was saying earlier too, is that the kind of current energy, or the sort of source of inspiration, I think, for a lot of things going on in the city are not from, the missing Fortune 500 or the ever leaving Fortune 500 companies, but from the small things that go on here, and the fact that a lot of the institutions, whether it's PNCA or PICA, or a lot of the businesses, small design businesses, can't be self-sustaining. They don't have the people, the resources, to be a closed system, right? And so they're forced by nature to reach out and collaborate and seek other information and other sources. And I think a lot of the older institutions, to do that, would have to abandon a belief system that they've been pursuing for a long, long time. And I don't know what it would take. I mean, I think a lot of that just comes down to leadership, right? I mean, it is interesting when you talk to people. I mean, living here as I, came back 20 years ago, and reading the paper again and again and again, and it all comes down to we don't have the money, we don't have the money, they don't have. Well, we'll never have the money in Portland. We will never have the money in the state of Oregon. We'll never have the money that New York has, or Chicago has, or California has, or even the state of Washington has. So sort of get over it, you know, and and I mean, if that is an inspiration for a new model and a new way of thinking, I don't know what else is. Survival.
Well, I think how this thing is happening is that it really goes to the core of some of human needs, belongingness. I saw that, and again, that's something that actually it's pretty evident in Portland too. It's part of its core DNA maybe. But you know, what I saw during the design festival was that by creating an event and a thing that people start coming together and, you know, talking together and showing their work together and competing against each other, whatever it is, and that suddenly everybody felt that they do belong to a bigger group than themselves. And this is a oxymoron kind of thing, because as craftsmen, you're people involved in their work. They're just doing their work. But there's a time that they need to belong to a bigger group of people. And in that case, we brought that out, and suddenly everybody started noticing that there are other talent here. There are this guy is doing that guy is doing this. And it was unbelievable, because even now I talk to some people and they talk about the 2 years of Design Festival and how they got to know different talents and people in town, and they start working with each other, start collaborating with each other. I myself didn't know some of the people that existed or the talent existed around, and so or institutions and what they do and everything else. So it was just making them aware and bringing them together, and that suddenly, you know, it wasn't that much money spent. We did it for $15,000 and 3 months. So it doesn't take that much really money to do this type of stuff. It's all about coming up with a creative way and understanding what is it that this core people or this type of people need and what they strive for, and just facilitate that for them. That's what it is. So, and you know, they will come together. It connects together. That's how it works. And I saw that, and so it was very. And I think what Tom is doing with 5 program and PNCA, and he's looking at it as a big picture, which is exactly what we should be doing, rather than looking at this is my institution, this is what I do, but he's reaching out, and this institution, UAVO, PNCA, or CAC, all these guys are not talking, and I know Portland State is there too, so it's great. Because I remember I was talking, said, these guys are doing this and those guys are doing that, and it's all about connection and just making those little pieces connect to each other, and suddenly it becomes an entity by itself, and it has. So,
just so that everyone, I know most of the people that are here know who Brad and Sohrab are, but. For those who aren't here and may not know what Ziba and Allied Works do, both of you, not to embarrass you, are really working at the very best levels of quality and excellence in the world. You can go anywhere and set up your activities, and in fact, you engage with people around the world who are also the very best at what they do. So there's this formulation around knowing what excellence and quality is, and bringing those expectations back to a place that, as Brad was saying, is never going to have the level of kind of investment that a New York or Chicago might have. And I'm wondering whether you could speak about that gap and how we close that gap. I know one of the things that Brad said was we need to be innovative, we need to invent new ways of doing things. But what is the role of organizations like yours in setting the bar of quality?
Setting the bar of quality is, I go back to my, defining One of the DNAs and DNAs of Ziba, craft. It's a DNA of Wieden+Kennedy, Brad. We are craftsmen. So with craft, there is no quality bar. It's every day, every time you do something, that's the, you push the quality. There's no standards being set or whatever. So when you're into your own work and it's about the work, it's about the craft, then the quality level rises, and it's very much the DNA of this city. I can tell you that. I see it in small scale and big scale everywhere.
I had the same exact thought, and that's the genesis of Allied Works, and I know that's the conversations that I had with Dan and John when we were working on Wieden+Kennedy. And there is something just inherently Oregonian about that just that kind of rigor and craftsmanship, and the fact that Allied Works was started with a bunch of University of Oregon graduates who were furniture makers, and from furnitures you do $80 million museums. It's the same sort of act and the same practice and the same ethics, and I think the ethics of that and the fact that we're all here is something that is a genesis of this place. And I think that goes back to your essential quality, or whatever the term was, is of just asking what is the ethic of this place that generates the best work that we do, and to build your institution or your practice or your business around that. And with me, again, in the beginning, it had to do with the resources I had to help me to do my work, and they were craftspeople. I mean, at the highest level.
Asking questions is a privilege of City Club members, and a synonym for question is inquiry rather than statement or speech. So we'd like you to limit your question to 30 seconds and end it with a question mark rather than an exclamation point. Today's first question will be asked by our board host, Carla Kelly. Carla is the General Counsel for the Port of Portland. Among her responsibilities on the City Club board for the last 3.5 years has been chairing the program committee. They're the ones responsible for 44 programs of the year like this. Carla's been a member since 1996. Carla?
Thank you, Don. Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. My question is going to be a little more concrete than the ideas that you've been discussing, and partly it's because I don't know you guys very well. I've heard of you. So for each of you, can you give our listeners and our audience here an example of some piece of work that you have done here that is uniquely informed by Portland, that you think, I did this work because I'm here. This is how Portland and I really interact.
I have to keep repeating this again. It's like, for me, it's not like we design something that has the shape of water or rain in it or whatever to say, okay, well, I got inspired by Portland. Again, you go back to, that's not how it works for us, at least. But it is about as I said, it's about what the values of this community is about, and what how we connect to it, and those values get translated into the work that we do. So authenticity, collaboration, craft, all those stuff is, you can see it in the work that we do, and the way we behave and the way we, our attitudes are. So I can't tell you exactly like, oh, this is this product, I got it inspired by the trees or the rain. It doesn't work that way.
My first projects were PDX Gallery with Jane Beebe, and then working with Christy on the first Pica space, and then working with Dan at Wieden+Kennedy. And I think the fact that whether it was Jane in her little first gallery went to an unknown architect to try to do something different, to Dan at Wieden+Kennedy for absolutely no sane reason choosing a 3-person office to do a $30 million project. There's a culture of risk I think here, at its best, there's a culture of risk. I don't think it's exercised enough. I think people have a little too much fear and trepidation, but I think at its best, that risk is an informed risk of looking and kind of demanding the best from the resources we have, and then working with that to create something that is only about this place. I mean, my office wouldn't exist without those projects. I mean, without PDX and PICA, I wouldn't have got the museums. Without Wieden+Kennedy, I probably wouldn't have gotten any of my projects. And those projects happened because those individuals chose to hire an unknown local architect and then allow me the opportunities to just do what I could do best.
Well, I don't get to design or build anything, but so I often say I'm not a visual artist, but I am a liberal artist, someone who really believes in the power of education. And I think what art schools do, art and design schools, is they place students in an environment where they can learn how to take the risks that Brad's talking about. And I think the best of our culture results from those successful experiments. The measure of the concrete value of schools like PNCA and Oregon College of Art and Craft and others, I think, is what their students do over a lifetime, not just the first job that they get when they graduate, but what they do 5, 10, 15, 20 years out. Lee Kelly's, who graduated from PNCA in 1959, is sitting in the audience today, and all one has to do is travel anywhere over Portland, go into any serious collector's home, not just Portland, Oregon, and in the Northwest, and you can see the impact that his work has had on our lives. If you watch Tiger Woods walk up the 18th hole of the Masters and you see that really cool Nike golf design, that's the work of a PNCA graduate who worked on Nike's golf fashion. Michael Curry, if you've ever gone to The Lion King, you're seeing the work of an artist trained in an art school who's taken those skills and ability to create and gone out and developed a world-class business around theater design. So I think those are the concrete measures of what we do.
Chris Smith, City Club member. My creative field is systems design, and I occasionally try and apply that to public policy here in Portland, but my day job is doing that in the world of software at Xerox. And in the software world, the paradigm shift to the last decade has been open source, where the creativity gets expressed in a way that becomes owned in the commons rather than a proprietary way, and then is open to inspection by huge numbers of people who can then improve it with their own contributions. Is that paradigm crossing over to your creative fields, and if so, how are you seeing its effects?
The whole idea of open source basically I like that. It's a very good metaphor because it's about actually collaboration to some extent. But the only thing is that in our business, this is very unique to us because we are working on things that are 5, 6 years ahead. We really cannot talk about or collaborate with outside of the company because we are under high confidentiality. I always envy architects because as soon as they get a commission, they can talk about it. We can sometimes talk about it forever. So I wish we could collaborate somehow with outside people. Now we do, when they're under NDA, we do use other people around. But inside Ziba is where that open source kind of a mentality or system takes place, where there is no anybody's project, but it's everybody who can contribute and add to it. It's almost like playing with Legos, and a bunch of people are just keep building something together. So that it takes place inside the company, but not that much outside unless, they're under NDA and such things.
It's interesting. It's different when you're a maker of objects or maker of buildings, because the disciplines you're dealing with such fixed variables, whether it's the material you're dealing with or the product you're aiming to produce. But I think what has changed and impacted what we do is just the access to the information, right? I mean, whether open source is a model, it's a kind of overused model in a lot of ways too, I think. But whether open source is a model or not, just in the inquiry phase, in the genesis phase, the access to the amount of information and the ease of that information and the ease and access to dialogue and where that dialogue takes you. I mean, we as an architect we have a research department to just, when we begin projects, make sure we're asking as many questions as we possibly can to access as much information and input before we make the assumptions that begin the physical building process. And I know when I was a student or even working 10 years ago in New York, that thinking that an architect needed a research arm to just get access and take advantage of what's out there is totally new for me anyway.
Andrew Wheeler, member. I think we should all be grateful that we have Tom Manley, who's provided the laboratory here for creative change and exchange. One question maybe has to do with product rather than the verbal. Is there some way that there could be some kind of visible product that would be developed by the kind of collaboration we're talking about? I'm a little leery of collaborations myself. I think that usually it takes one good intellect to take the lead, but I'd like to hear some commentary on that.
Oh, I'm sure there are ways to collaborate on something between different disciplines and us. And we actually, if you come to think about it, we have in some of the more of a space design that we do. We collaborate with architects and other disciplines that we don't have, and so yes, I would love to. If there is a way to do something in the city that there more people could collaborate. I think that's happening anyway with institutions like PNCA and people like us and Brad, and so it is happening as far as I know.
I just wanted to say that I was thinking more about collaboration with the students at the educational institution.
And that's happening too, because we actually are working with the University of Oregon Product Development Program and helping them to set it up, and we're collaborating with them. We have people who are teaching at AI. We have people coming through. We are sponsoring projects with some of these educational facilities. So those are the ways that we are collaborating with education facilities, and that's really dear to my heart. So that's not going to go away. It's going to get more as I get more time.
I think that as a educational model, this notion of collaboration and partnerships with for-profit enterprises to sort of bring ideas into life and into production, whether they're limited objects or things that are more mass-produced, is something that we're seeing in many other places. It's certainly the case in Europe. And we have been talking with several different companies locally about how we might set up an incubation program, a unit that's not actually in the college and is for-profit, but connects students and designers and faculty members and thinkers to those real-world projects after they graduate. The other thing I would say is there's an amazing school located outside of Boston called Olin College, which has really turned the whole world of engineering on its head, and it's placed at the center of its curriculum, which is a very good engineering curriculum, the arts and the humanities. And every Olin student works in the humanities, in poetry, in the visual arts, as part of what they do, and they work in project teams, and they actually go out and they address real-world problems. And I think that is one of the models that we could very effectively explore and exploit here.
Paddy Tillett, City Club member. I was intrigued by what you had to say about extending the creative grid beyond the design professions. And looking around Portland, I see some incredibly inventive organizations like ESCO, like OHSU, like Linux perhaps, And I wonder, what is the mechanism by which we can cultivate that expansion of the grid to begin to make real contact with them? Because it seems that we have the potential for huge creativity if we can accomplish that.
We would love to, because that's that science and art coming together. If there would be, sometimes, you know, some of these larger institutions are very insular to some extent. You know, that is, you know, we are scientists and this is what we do. You know, I mean, maybe that diversity will help expand that thinking that, you know, there are other ways to think about stuff and collaborate or whatever, but I think there's some wonderful opportunities in that, what you just said.
It is interesting, and I was thinking about this earlier relative to colleges, and I mean, museums, it's very hard to get the contemporary curators and the 18th century European curators and the Asian curators to collaborate. I mean, every director I've ever talked about wants to mix the programs. They never do. I know universities, the painters, the landscape architects, and the architects are all supposed to collaborate, and they very rarely do. And you know, all of this will between science and the arts and making and would be, you know, I think the will is there, but the mechanism is so hard. I mean, the only thing I've ever understood that allows that to happen is if you invent a project. I mean, you can always do the panels and forums, and we all come together and we say how much we like to collaborate, right? But is there a project? You know, could you get 3 or 4 people together from those different institutions or disciplines and invent a project that really forces that kind of dialogue, you know, and whether the project is a program or a building or a new institution. I mean, I think it really does take a project. It takes something tangible, more than even a mechanism. It just takes a thing. And who is the initiator of that thing that crosses the boundaries? I mean, I think that's what we all struggle with, is who will put that thing out there that's between all of our boundaries that make us all reach out to do that. Because we reach out with our own will when we need help or we're curious, right? But to do something that was a magnet to pull those things together, that's a great question.
I really agree with the notion that you have to do something. And I think being constrained by our institutional cultures and allowing that to keep us from actually doing something is a problem, and that's the role of leadership, and that's the role of individual creative entrepreneurs to push us off of those blocks and to get us thinking where new connections can be made and where we can create that sort of new density. So, and I think it's also the role of philanthropists, and I think it's the role of the city to actually invest in the quality of that kind of experimentation and collaboration.
It's interesting because, I got cut off. I thought it was edit. It's just interesting because you only innovate around a question, right? And so we'll innovate and collaborate because we're posing a question that we need to answer and we can't answer it ourselves and we need help. And so someone, again, whether it is the city or some other form of, if they can pose the question, the right question, it will gather those people. If it's a question that only that collaboration can answer, so it's really about formulating the right question, I think.
I agree.
I'm sorry we don't have time for any more questions. Tom, Brad, and Sohrab, we thank you for an excellent program. We're adjourned.